My son banned me from his wedding but still demanded $85,000 from me. Can you imagine receiving an envelope from your only child, believing it held an invitation, only to find a bill larger than your life savings? No words of love, no request for my presence, just a note telling me to be grateful for paying. That day, in the quiet of my kitchen as the rain began to fall, I felt the bond between father and son shatter. But what Daniel did not expect was that his perfect day would turn into a storm he could not escape. Dear friends, stay with me until the end, because the lesson buried in this story may surprise you. The envelope lay on my kitchen table, heavier than it should have been. My hands trembled a little as I turned it over, tracing the neat handwriting on the front. It had been so long since I heard from Daniel that my heart leapt for a moment. Maybe after all the silence, this was the invitation I had been waiting for. Maybe he had come to his senses and wanted his father at his wedding. I let that small hope carry me as I broke the seal carefully, expecting to see a date, a time, a place where I could watch my only son start a new chapter. What slid out was not an invitation. It was a stack of papers, crisp and cold, the kind of pages accountants love, an itemized bill, each line typed neatly, numbers marching down the page. My eyes caught the total at the bottom before anything else. $85,000. My breath caught. I felt as though the walls closed in on me, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder, the tick of the clock almost cruel. I lowered myself into the chair, gripping the paper with both hands, scanning the lines one by one. 30,000 for the mansion rental at Oakwood Manor, a sprawling estate with fountains and chandeliers. 25,000 for catering, lobster, and imported wine. 10,000 for the honeymoon in Maui, private villa with a stretch of beach. The rest was scattered across photographers, flowers, live music. I stared at the numbers until they blurred, my pulse pounding in my ears. At the bottom was a handwritten note, the words cut sharper than the figures. Dad, after the problems you have caused, be grateful I am letting you contribute. Send the money quickly. Victoria and I are counting on it. I read it twice, then a third time, as though it might change under my gaze. Be grateful. Problems I had caused. As if raising him alone, putting food on the table, working double shifts after his mother died, had been a crime. I crumpled the note in my fist, the paper groaning like brittle leaves, but then I smoothed it out again. My eyes kept drifting to the photograph on the shelf. Daniel at 8 years old, his front teeth missing, holding a baseball in his small hand, smiling at me with a joy that felt like the sun. How did that boy become this man, sending his father a bill like I was some anonymous sponsor? My chest tightened and I had to stand, pacing the kitchen. The floorboards creaked under my steps. The October afternoon light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, yet the room felt cold. I splashed water on my face at the sink, but the sting did not wash away. I thought about the savings I had tucked away over years of sacrifice, the money that was supposed to carry me through retirement with some dignity. Daniel expected me to drain it for his party, after banning me from attending. My knees ached as I lowered myself back into the chair. My hand reached instinctively for the old pocket watch resting on the counter. My father's watch, passed down to me. It ticked steady in my palm, a sound older than both of us. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm calm me. Anger rose like a storm, but beneath it was something colder, a clarity I had not felt in years. This was not only about money, it was about respect, about the bond that had been broken long ago. Daniel had severed it with one arrogant note. I sat there, the papers spread before me, the watch in my hand, and felt a shift inside me. I would not let him humiliate me again. I would not be treated like an open checkbook. The rain began to tap against the window, a soft beginning to what the forecast promised would be a long storm. I stared at the bill one last time, folded it neatly, and slid it back into the envelope. My reflection in the glass above the sink looked older than I remembered, lined with years of weariness, but in my eyes there was a new fire. He thought he could erase me and still take from me. He was wrong. I whispered into the empty kitchen, though the sound startled me. "This is not over, Daniel. Not by a long shot." The rain outside quickened, and in that rhythm I felt my resolve harden into steel. I could not stop looking at that old photo of Daniel from his Little League days. His smile was wide and unguarded, the kind of smile that made you believe everything in life was still possible. I remembered the Saturday mornings when we would pack the cooler with juice boxes and sandwiches, Linda fussing over sunscreen while I laced up his cleats. The field always smelled of cut grass and dust, the sound of kids shouting mixing with the crack of bats. Daniel would run to me after every play, whether he struck out or hit a single, his small hand reaching for mine as though my approval was the only scoreboard that mattered. Back then it was just the three of us, a little family bound together by simple routines. Linda cheering with her hands cupped around her mouth, me tossing the ball with Daniel until his arm gave out. Even on days when my body ached from a long week at the plant, I never missed a game. I wanted him to know his father would always be there, no matter how tired or worn down. But time has a way of carving distance, where once there was closeness. I thought of the night Linda slipped away in the hospital, her hand cold in mine, Daniel standing stiff at the foot of the bed. He was 20 then, full of anger he did not know where to place. I tried to console him, but he would not meet my eyes. Weeks later, he accused me outright. "You should have done more, Dad. You should have found a way to save her." Those words cut deeper than any bill ever could. After that, something shifted. The calls grew fewer. He buried himself in his new job at the tech firm, climbing fast, dressing sharp, surrounding himself with people who measured worth by titles and bank accounts. I still tried. I drove out to see him, brought the same tamales Linda used to make, hoping the taste would bring him back to us for even one meal. He barely touched them, telling me they had switched to a plant-based diet. I sat there with my plate cooling, listening to him and Victoria talk about business trips and expensive wine, feeling like a relic in my own son's home. The memory that always haunts me is one Christmas. I had spent weeks carving a small wooden chest, sanding it smooth, lining it with fabric. Inside I placed a few old keepsakes, Linda's recipe cards, Daniel's baseball glove from when he was 10, a photo of the three of us at the beach. When I handed it to him, he gave me a thin smile and set it aside without opening it. Victoria whispered something and he laughed, moving on to unwrap a gadget from one of her friends. I sat in that room full of lights and wrapping paper, but I had never felt more invisible. It was not just that he pulled away. It was the way he seemed ashamed of where he came from. When he introduced me to colleagues, he would rush past the details, calling me retired without mentioning the decades I worked to put him through school. Once, at a dinner, I overheard him joke that his father was a simple man who never reached higher. He said it with a shrug, as if my life of steady labor had been something pitiful. I swallowed my pride that night, but inside I knew a wall had been built brick by brick. Yet even as the distance grew, I held on to the boy from the Little League field. I remembered the rainstorm that caught us one summer. We sat in the car with the windows fogging, Daniel pressed against me, whispering that I was the strongest man he knew. That memory clung to me like a ghost, a reminder that love once flowed freely between us. Now, when I see him, all polished shoes and cold words, I search for that boy and cannot find him. I wonder if he remembers the warmth of those afternoons, the smell of the grill after the games, his mother's laughter echoing across the yard. Or has he buried it all under ambition and pride? I leaned back in my chair, the bill still lying folded on the table, and felt the ache of years pressing down on me. I was not just mourning the insult written in his note. I was mourning the loss of that boy who once looked at me with eyes full of trust. Somewhere between the Little League field and the glossy halls of his new life, I lost my son. And maybe, just maybe, he lost himself too. I often wonder how much of Daniel's distance is truly his own choice, and how much of it is shaped by Victoria. From the first time I met her, there was a look in her eyes that told me I did not belong in her world. It was at a dinner in their downtown apartment, all glass walls and polished steel. a place that felt more like a showroom than a home. She greeted me with a smile that never touched her eyes, the kind of smile people wear when they are tolerating someone. I had brought along a casserole dish, Linda's old recipe, the one Daniel used to ask for on his birthdays. Victoria barely glanced at it before setting it aside and directing a server to bring out some imported plates. She spoke of vacations in Italy, of shopping trips in Chicago, her words sprinkled with names of designers and places I had never stepped foot in. I sat at that table, chewing slowly, while Daniel laughed at her stories as though they were gospel. I felt myself shrinking smaller with each clink of their crystal glasses. It was not just the wealth or the shine of it all. It was the way she carried herself, as if the rest of us were props in her performance. At Christmas, when I tried to hand Daniel the box of old keepsakes I had saved, she leaned close to him and whispered something. I did not catch the words, but I saw his smile falter and his eyes harden. He set the box aside unopened. In that moment, I knew the divide between us was no longer just miles or misunderstandings. It had a name, and it sat beside him wearing a designer dress. There were smaller moments too, the kind that cut deep because they seemed so casual. One evening, when I stopped by unannounced with tamales, Victoria barely looked up from her phone. She whispered again, and Daniel said they were vegan now, his tone clipped as if my gesture was some intrusion. I left with the food untouched, the ride home long and quiet, headlights blurring through my tears. I remembered how Linda used to dream of seeing Daniel marry, how she wanted him to find someone kind, someone who would build a life with him grounded in love and respect. I do not think she would have recognized the man Daniel has become beside Victoria. The warmth in him has been traded for a hunger to impress, to rise higher, to look untouchable, and she feeds that hunger like firewood. Sometimes I hear echoes of her voice in the sharp words he throws at me. When he said I should be grateful to contribute, I could almost hear her prompting him, reminding him that appearances matter more than ties of blood. She grew up in a family that flaunted wealth, a family that saw dignity not in work but in status. I could see it in the way her parents looked at me once across a holiday table, eyes sliding over my worn sweater as if I were invisible. Daniel must have felt that judgment too, but instead of defending where he came from, he joined their side. The social divide is more than money. It is the way they dismiss history, the way they erase struggle as if it is shameful. In their world, hard work is not honorable unless it comes with glossy recognition. I spent my life building stability brick by brick, and somehow that became an embarrassment to my son. I can feel Victoria's shadow in that shame, whispering that a simple father with calloused hands would tarnish their perfect image at Oakwood Manor. I think back to the last Thanksgiving I spent with them. She had organized the dinner at a private club, white linens and chandeliers overhead. I sat at the end of the table while servers poured wine I could not pronounce. Daniel hardly spoke to me, too busy mingling with her friends. When I tried to share a memory about him as a boy, Victoria interrupted with a laugh, turning the conversation back to a ski trip they had planned. My story died in my throat. That was the night I realized I was not just excluded from their wedding. I had been excluded from their lives long before. Now, as I sit with his note demanding $85,000, I hear her voice behind every word. I imagine her pushing him to cut me out of the guest list, convincing him that my presence would lower the sheen of their grand affair. And yet she is happy to have my money pay for it all. That is the cruelest cut. Not only am I unworthy of standing beside him, I am expected to finance the image they want to project to the world. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the glass in crooked lines. I pressed my palm to the window and whispered into the empty house. If Linda could see this, her heart would break. Mine already has. But with the ache came a sharper feeling. Resolve. If they think I will fund my own erasure, they are mistaken. The shadow of Victoria may loom large, but I still have my dignity, and I will not let it be bought or buried. The rain came down harder that night, beating against the windows in a steady rhythm. I sat alone at the table with the envelope in front of me, the papers still folded inside like a wound I could not close. The room was dim except for the yellow light of the lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. I reached for the pocket watch resting near the papers and held it in my palm. Its tick was faint but steady, a sound that seemed to echo from my father's time into mine. I thought about the generations before me, men who had worked with their hands, who built lives out of long hours and little pay. My father never had fine suits or shiny cars, but he carried himself with dignity. He used to tell me that a man's worth is not measured by what others see, but by how he stands when no one is watching. I felt the weight of that truth pressing down on me. Daniel's note was not just about money. It was about stripping me of that worth, reducing me to nothing more than a wallet. The anger had burned hot when I first read the bill, but as the rain drummed harder on the roof, it began to cool into something sharper. I realized anger alone would only consume me. What I needed was clarity. What I needed was resolve. I unfolded the papers again, running my finger down the list of expenses. Each line seemed to mock me. Imported wines, lobster from Maine, honeymoon villa in Maui. I whispered to myself, "This is not my responsibility." I leaned back and closed my eyes, listening to the storm outside. The sound reminded me of a summer years ago when Daniel was a boy, and a sudden thunderstorm had chased us off the ball field. We had run to the car, both soaked through, laughing as rain hammered the roof. He had pressed himself against me, whispering that I was the strongest man he knew. I opened my eyes now and stared at the man he had become, at least in my mind, and felt the ache of betrayal. Yet buried beneath that ache was a flicker of determination. If he once believed I was strong, then I would be strong again. The kitchen felt smaller as I paced back and forth, the floor creaking under my steps. The smell of damp air seeped through the window frame, mixing with the stale coffee left in the pot. I pressed my hands against the counter and looked around the room that had seen years of family dinners, birthday cakes, quiet evenings with Linda. This house held my history. I would not let Daniel erase that with a bill and a cruel note. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer and laid it on the table. The pen felt cold in my hand as I began to write. I listed every vendor mentioned in the documents, every cost, every date. My writing was slow at first, but steadier with each word. The more I wrote, the more control I felt seeping back into me. I was no longer the father blindsided by his son's arrogance. I was a man making a plan. The rain outside grew into a downpour, rattling the gutters, but inside I felt calm. I knew then that I would not confront Daniel with shouting or begging. That would give him more power. Instead, I would use patience, knowledge, and the strength of truth. He wanted me invisible, erased from his perfect picture, yet funded by my labor. He would learn that a man cannot be erased so easily. I folded the bill once more and placed the pocket watch on top of it, the metal warm from my hand. The two objects sat side by side, one symbol of disrespect, the other a reminder of dignity. I stared at them and knew which one I would choose to honor. I whispered into the quiet, "This ends differently than he expects." As the storm roared, I settled into the chair again, my pen resting on the notebook, the weight of the watch steady in my pocket. The rain beat harder, but I no longer felt small beneath it. In its rhythm I heard something else, a call to stand, to act, to take back the respect that had been stripped away. My resolve had been forged in the downpour. Whatever came next, I would meet it head on. The storm passed by morning but left the yard soaked, puddles glimmering under a gray sky. I sat with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at my old laptop on the counter. It had not been opened in months, maybe years, but I pulled it close and brushed the dust from the lid. When it hummed to life, the sound was shaky, like me, but it was enough. I told myself if Daniel wanted to treat me like an outsider, then I would see what he was really up to, the life he was so desperate to buy with my money. I typed in his name first, but most of his profiles were locked tight, hidden behind privacy walls. That did not surprise me. Daniel always controlled the way people saw him, but Victoria was different. She wanted an audience. Within seconds, I was staring at a page filled with curated images, each one polished, each one screaming about wealth. Her smile was wide in every photo, her nails perfectly done, her arms looped through Daniels like they were models in an advertisement. I scrolled slowly, my stomach tightening with every post. There were photos of Oakwood Manor, a place I had only ever driven past on the highway. Chandeliers glittering like stars, long banquet tables lined with crystal glasses, floral arrangements taller than me. She had written captions with hearts and champagne emojis. Our dream wedding coming soon. Blessed beyond measure. In another post, she posed on the grand staircase of the manor during a planning visit, writing about how magical the night would be. Then came the menus, snapshots of glossy catering brochures with lobster, caviar, imported wines listed proudly. She tagged the catering company with excitement. Another post showed her trying on a gown in a boutique, the price tag visible in the reflection of a mirror. $3,200 for lace and fabric, flaunted as if it were nothing. Daniel stood beside her in one photo, grinning, the caption reading, "Daddy's got it covered." The words made my chest tighten. I whispered into the empty kitchen, "No, Daddy does not." I opened a notebook and began writing down names. Oakwood Manor, cost $30,000 at least. Bella Catering, known for high-end menus, deposits required. The gown from Taylor and Finch, expensive and exclusive. Photographer Leah Voss, tagged in the comments. Her work filled with staged shots that looked like magazine covers. I copied every name, every price, every detail. My pen scratched across the paper, steady and sharp. The deeper I went, the more obscene it felt. A honeymoon package flashed across the screen. Overwater villas in Maui with private pools. Victoria had tagged the resort, writing, "Can't wait to wake up in paradise." I could almost hear her laughter, light and careless, as if this life was owed to her. I circled the words on my paper, $10,000 at least. The posts piled one on top of another until my eyes blurred. Friends congratulated them in comments, showering them with admiration. #goals, one wrote. Another called them the power couple of Lexington. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop harsh in the dim kitchen, and felt a coldness spread through me. All of this glitter and glamour, built on the assumption that I would foot the bill. But I did not just feel anger, I felt clarity. Each post was not only a show, it was evidence. Evidence of priorities, evidence of arrogance, evidence of how far they were willing to go to erase me while draining me dry. I underlined Oakwood Manor 3 times and circled the date Victoria had casually revealed in one caption, November 15th. Weeks away. The rain began again lightly, tapping the glass. I leaned forward and whispered, "Let them keep posting." Every photo is another piece of the puzzle, another brick in the case they are building against themselves. If they wanted to flaunt their luxury, I would follow the trail they laid out so proudly. I closed the laptop gently, slid my notebook in front of me, and rested my hand on the pocket watch in my pocket. The tick was steady, like my breath. The storm outside was only beginning. I drove into the city the next morning with the envelope tucked inside my jacket and my notes folded neatly in my pocket. The sky was heavy with clouds that threatened more rain, and the streets glistened from the night before. My old truck felt out of place among the polished cars parked along Main Street, but I found a spot a block away from the address I had written down. The building stood tall and modern, all glass and steel, the kind of place that seemed designed to make people like me feel small. I took a long breath, touched the pocket watch in my coat, and walked inside. The lobby smelled faintly of cologne and fresh flowers. A receptionist with perfect hair greeted me and asked who I was there to see. I gave the name Marcus Brandt, and she smiled as if she already knew I would be expected. Within minutes I was led into a corner office with wide windows overlooking the city. Marcus stood from behind a desk piled with swatches and glossy binders. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, and he shook my hand with practiced warmth. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, "Kevin mentioned you would be in touch about finalizing payments. We are thrilled you are contributing to such a special event." He gestured for me to sit. His words rolled smoothly, too smoothly, like a salesman who believed the deal was already signed. I settled into the chair, feeling the leather too soft under me, and watched him flip open a folder. Inside were contracts with Daniel's name printed neatly across the top. Marcus spoke quickly, describing floral arches, chandeliers imported from Europe, a quartet rehearsing special arrangements. He slid a page across the desk showing the balance due, his pen tapping lightly on the figure. 85,000 in total, with a large portion still outstanding. I let him talk until his voice began to sound like background noise. Then I leaned forward and placed the folded bill from the envelope on the desk. "Did Kevin tell you," I asked slowly, "that I am not invited to this wedding, that the only letter I received from my son was this demand for money?" The pen slipped from his hand and clattered softly against the folder. His face shifted from polished calm to something closer to confusion. "Banned," he repeated, his brows furrowing. "That is highly unusual." He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. He assured me all family contributions were settled. "This is awkward." "Awkward," I echoed, my voice sharper. "Try insulting. After raising him alone, after burying his mother with my own hands, after working every overtime shift I could find, my son sends me a bill and tells me to be grateful, and you expect me to simply sign a check." Marcus rubbed his temple and looked down at the papers. "The contracts are signed," he muttered, "but without the balance paid we cannot proceed. Deposits are non-refundable." His voice trailed as though he knew how hollow it sounded. "Exactly," I said, pushing the paper back toward him. "Inform Kevin that this event halts until he speaks to me directly. No money will come from me. If he wants to proceed, he will have to find another way. And if he pushes, remind him how fragile plans can be when payments vanish." For a long moment the only sound was the hum of the air vent above us. Then Marcus nodded slowly, his polished mask slipping. "I will call him today," he said. "This changes things." I could see in his eyes that he thought Daniel was arrogant too. I stood, my knees stiff, and offered him a curt nod. As I walked out into the gray morning, the cool air filled my lungs and I felt lighter. The city noise swirled around me, cars honking, people rushing past with umbrellas, but inside I carried a quiet strength. For the first time in years I had spoken without fear, without bending, without apologizing for who I was. When the office door had closed behind me, I thought I heard Marcus mutter under his breath, "That arrogant kid." The words followed me down the sidewalk like a whisper of confirmation. I pulled the collar of my jacket up against the wind and made my way back to the truck. The rain began again, tapping gently at first, and I gripped the steering wheel with steady hands. The ripple had started, and I knew it would spread. The day after meeting with Marcus, I sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand, scrolling through the numbers I had not touched in years. Most of them belonged to people who had drifted away, neighbors who had moved, co-workers long retired. Then my eyes stopped on a name I had nearly forgotten. Alex Carter. Alex had been Daniel's closest friend growing up. He spent so many nights at our house that Linda used to joke we had 2 sons instead of 1. After his parents split, he often knocked on our door with a duffel bag and sad eyes, and we always made space for him. I remembered Linda handing him hot chocolate on cold nights, and me teaching him math at the kitchen table while Daniel teased him for working too slowly. He was part of us then. But as the years passed and Daniel climbed higher, Alex was left behind. I still remember the bitterness in Alex's voice when he told me that Daniel had stolen his project idea in college and passed it off as his own. They had not spoken since. I wondered if that old wound still stung. I stared at the number for a long time before pressing call. The line rang twice, and then I heard his voice, older but still familiar. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, surprise lacing the words. "Wow, it has been a long time. How are you?" "Not exactly well," I admitted. "Daniel is getting married, but things are complicated. Can we meet? I need your expertise." I heard him let out a low whistle. "I know you probably heard. I continued. You are a private investigator now. He chuckled dryly. Word gets around. Yeah, I do some detective work, some photography. Keeps me busy. Where do you want to meet? There was an old cafe on Broadway where Linda used to take us for pie. I suggested it without thinking. He agreed quickly. Give me an hour, he said. When I walked into the cafe, the smell of coffee and baked bread hit me, warm and comforting. The leaves outside swirled in little whirlwinds down the sidewalk. Alex was already there, taller than I remembered, with sharper eyes that carried the weight of experience. A camera bag rested on the chair beside him. He stood and gripped my hand firmly, his smile both surprised and cautious. You look good, Mr. Reynolds, he said. Sorry about Linda. She was like a mom to me, too. I nodded, my throat tightening. Call me Clark, I said. We sat down and I slid him a cup of coffee. I told him about the envelope, the $85,000 bill, the note that said I should be grateful. I told him about being banned from the wedding while still expected to fund it all. His face darkened with each detail. That sounds like Daniel, he said bitterly. He ditched me years ago when I refused to lie on a job reference for him, said I was holding him back. I nodded, remembering my own scars. He has a way of using people until they are no longer useful. Alex leaned forward, his voice low. What do you want me to do? I want proof, I said. Photos, recordings, whatever it takes. If he wants to play games with my dignity, then I need to be prepared. I need someone I can trust. For a moment he was quiet, stirring his coffee. Then he looked up at me with the same steady gaze he once had as a boy who trusted me to protect him. You were there for me when no one else was, he said. You let me sleep on your couch. You treated me like family. I owe you. I will help. We talked for hours, pie slices growing cold between us. He told me he could position himself near Oakwood Manor on the wedding day, that he could capture the truth if things unraveled. He even offered to help me with surveillance at my own house, in case Daniel tried to twist the story later. His skills were far sharper than I expected. As the afternoon light dimmed, a woman at the counter waved at us. Mrs. Jenkins, our old neighbor. She laughed, remembering the summer when Daniel and Alex had filled her yard with fake snow. Alex grinned for a moment, but it faded quickly. Those days are gone, he said quietly. He changed. Mine too, I replied, but maybe we can make something right again. When we parted, his handshake was firm, his eyes alive with purpose. As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I had not felt in years. I was not alone. I had an ally, someone who knew Daniel's tricks and would not be fooled. The rain had stopped and the sky was clearing, but inside me the storm still raged, now sharpened with direction. Whatever Daniel had planned, it would not go unchallenged. That evening Alex came by my house carrying a worn leather bag slung over his shoulder. The rain had started again, falling in a steady sheet that turned the porch light into a blurred halo. He shook the water from his coat as I opened the door and stepped inside. The house felt different with him there, as if his presence carried the same determination I had been trying to hold on to alone. He set the bag down on my coffee table and began pulling out devices, each one small and discreet. First came a recorder, no larger than a lighter, with a single button in the middle. He placed it in my hand and showed me how to press it once to capture every word of a conversation. He explained the law in Ohio that only one party needed to consent to a recording. That meant, as long as I was part of the call, every word Daniel or Victoria said could be preserved. I turned the device over in my hand, the weight of it oddly reassuring. Next, he pulled out 2 small cameras, each one no bigger than a key fob. He walked around the living room, pointing out corners where I could mount them to capture a clear view of anyone who entered. One by the door, another by the hallway leading to the kitchen. The images streamed directly to my phone. He showed me how to check them, how to save the files, how to send them to him if needed. I practiced lifting my phone and seeing my own face appear on the screen, the picture crisp even in the dim light of the lamp. As he explained the setup, my mind drifted back to the nights when he was a boy on my couch, staying over after his parents' arguments. I remembered how Linda insisted we make space for him, how she folded him into our family without hesitation. Now here he was, grown, steady, returning that loyalty when I needed it most. We sat together at the table while the storm rattled the windows. He coached me through mock calls, pretending to be Daniel, accusing twisting words, trying to bait me into shouting. He showed me how to stay calm, how to keep my tone even while letting them reveal themselves. The memory of past arguments with Daniel came back to me in flashes. Him shouting that I had failed his mother, me gripping the phone in silence, feeling powerless. Alex looked me in the eye and said, "Do not let him drag you there again. Keep your voice steady, and let him burn himself out." His words sank deep. I thought about the night years ago when I sold my car to pay for more of Linda's treatments. Daniel had stormed out of the hospital after accusing me of not doing enough. That accusation still echoed in my head, raw and cutting. I shared it quietly with Alex, and his expression softened. "You gave everything," he said firmly. "I remember. You were the one who kept me safe, too. That is why I am here." We raised our mugs of coffee, a quiet toast to justice rather than revenge. The steam curled between us like a fragile bond mended after years of silence. He walked me through the final steps, placing the recorder on the table where I could reach it easily, testing the angle of the cameras, double-checking that the feeds worked. When he left later that night, the rain had eased into a mist, and the house felt different. The silence was no longer heavy with loneliness. It was filled with purpose. I walked through each room, noting the corners where the devices rested, touching the phone in my pocket to feel the steady link to them. I sat once more at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had opened Daniel's cruel note, and this time I did not feel helpless. I reached for the pocket watch, listening to its tick while the faint hum of the recorder filled the room. It was as though the house itself had taken a deep breath with me. I whispered into the stillness, "I am ready now. Whatever storm they bring to my door, I will not be caught off guard. The trap is set, and this time I will not be the one left broken." The silence did not last long. Only a few days passed after I met with Marcus before the phone began to light up with Daniel's name. The first call came in the late afternoon while I was brewing tea. I let it ring twice before pressing the recorder and answering. His voice came through clipped and hurried. "Dad, what is going on? Marcus says you are refusing to pay. You cannot just pull out like this. You are sabotaging everything." I kept my tone even, remembering Alex's advice. I told him calmly that I was not paying a dime for a wedding I was not even invited to. The line went quiet for a beat, then erupted with his anger. "You are ruining this for me. Do you understand how important this island?" I ended the call before my own anger could spill out. Within minutes the phone buzzed again, this time Victoria's name flashing across the screen. I answered, and her voice came sharp, like glass breaking. "Stephen, you are being childish. The vendors are threatening to cancel. Do you want us humiliated? Think about how this looks." I closed my eyes and listened, letting her words cut the air, but not my resolve. I told her I would not discuss it further and hung up. That evening, 3 voicemails stacked one after another. Daniel's voice started calm, then cracked into panic. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. "Just wire the money and we can fix this." Then came the accusations. "You owe us this after everything." I replayed the messages twice, noting the way his voice trembled at the edges. The calm mask was slipping. I sat at the table with the recorder still running, listening to the rain begin again outside. Each message was like a hammer blow, not because I doubted myself, but because it revealed how desperate they were becoming. They expected me to break. They thought the pressure would drive me back into the corner where I had spent years standing, silent and compliant. Not anymore. By the next morning, text messages flooded in, lines of blame glowing on the screen. Selfish, old man, jealous, destroying our happiness. I scrolled through them slowly, sipping my coffee, letting the words pass over me. In a strange way, it felt like fuel. Every insult was proof of how fragile their foundation really was. Neighbors began to call too. Mrs. Hargrove from down the street spoke hesitantly. "Stephen, I have heard people whispering about Daniel's wedding. They say money troubles are causing delays. Is everything all right?" I thanked her for checking on me and felt a flicker of something I had not felt in years. The community was noticing. His perfect image was starting to crack. That evening another voicemail came, this time darker than the rest. Daniel's voice low and shaking. "If you do not fix this, you will regret it." I sat in my chair long after the message ended, staring at the phone in my hand. The threat hung heavy in the room, but instead of fear I felt a strange calm. I pressed the recorder again, saving every word. The pressure only grew from there. Calls at all hours, texts that filled the screen, Victoria's voice sharp and demanding whenever I dared to answer. Once she snapped, "You are throwing away your son's future out of spite." I nearly laughed at the irony. "Out of spite," she said, as if their cruelty had never existed. Each night I reviewed the recordings, listening carefully to every slip in their voices, every word that revealed panic and arrogance mixed together. The trap was working. They were unraveling not because of anything I had shouted or done, but because of the weight of their own greed pressing down on them. I looked around my quiet house, the glow of the lamp soft against the walls, the steady tick of the pocket watch in my palm. They thought they could bury me under demands and threats. Instead, they were digging their own pit. I whispered into the stillness, "Let the pressure mount. I will not bend. Not this time." It started with a quiet phone call from my neighbor Ellis. His voice was low, almost amused. "Stephen, I saw your boy yesterday screaming at a delivery guy outside Oakwood Manor. Said the boxes were creased and demanded replacements. Folks were watching, shaking their heads. Word is spreading." I thanked him and hung up, sitting for a long moment in the stillness of my kitchen. It had begun. The next day at the grocery store, 2 women from down the block stopped me in the aisle. They lowered their voices as though sharing a secret. "We heard about Daniel's wedding troubles," one of them whispered. "Something about vendors not being paid. Is everything all right?" I gave them a small smile and told them I was fine. Their eyes lingered on me with a mix of pity and curiosity before they moved on. At church the following Sunday, an old friend clasped my shoulder and said he had heard rumors too. People saying the Reynolds wedding was turning into a fiasco. I felt my chest tighten, but not from shame. It was the satisfaction of knowing that Daniel's perfect image was cracking in front of the very crowd he wanted to impress. His arrogance was no longer hidden behind glossy invitations or social media posts. It was spilling into the streets. The whispers grew louder. Mrs. Jenkins, the same neighbor who once tolerated Daniel's childhood pranks, stopped me on her porch one evening. "I never liked the way that girl looked at you," she said bluntly. "And now people are saying vendors are pulling out because bills aren't being paid. You don't deserve this, Stephen. You gave that boy everything." Her words settled heavy in me, both comforting and sorrowful. Even at the hardware store, I overheard 2 men talking near the counter. One mentioned Oakwood Manor, saying he had a cousin working as a caterer. They said the whole event was hanging by a thread because the family couldn't settle the balance. I turned away before they noticed me, but I carried those words home like a hidden trophy. I remembered all the times Daniel had dismissed me, telling me I was too simple, too modest, too much of an embarrassment to stand beside him. Yet now it was his own choices, his own cruelty, that were being judged. The same neighbors he once looked down on were shaking their heads at his behavior. The same community he thought beneath him was watching him stumble. Each call and conversation confirmed what I already knew. The truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it is buried. I had not needed to shout or expose him myself. His own arrogance was doing the work for me. Every unpaid deposit, every cruel demand, every boast on social media was unraveling into public humiliation. One evening I sat by the window as the street grew dark, the pocket watch warm in my hand. The voices of children playing drifted up from down the block. I thought of Daniel at that age, running in the yard, chasing a ball, his laughter free and unguarded. I wondered if the people who whispered now remembered that boy too, or if all they saw was the man he had become, shouting at delivery drivers and demanding luxury he had not earned. The phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Hargrove, her voice trembling. "Stephen, I just want you to know you are not alone. People see what is happening. They see you standing firm." Her words brought a sting to my eyes. For so long I had felt invisible, erased from my own son's life. But now, in this storm, others were seeing me again. I set the phone down and let the house fall into silence. The community had begun to hear, and once whispers start, they spread faster than fire in dry grass. Daniel wanted a grand show, a spectacle of wealth and success. Instead, he was building a different kind of spectacle, one of arrogance and collapse, and everyone was watching. I whispered into the dim room, "You wanted an audience, Daniel. Now you have one. And they are seeing you clearly." The morning of the wedding broke under a heavy sky, gray clouds rolling low and swollen with rain. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee warming my hands, listening to the steady tick of the pocket watch in my pocket. The air felt charged, as though the storm outside mirrored the storm I had set in motion. My phone buzzed before 7. It was Alex. "At the estate now," he wrote. "Vendors already pulling back." He sent a photo of florists loading boxes back into their van, their shoulders hunched under umbrellas. I stared at the screen, the image both surreal and inevitable. By 10 the rain had turned to sheets, lashing across the roads and making the world blur through my window. Another message arrived. "Caterer truck leaving," Alex typed. They refused to unload without full payment. Attached was another photo, crates of untouched china being carried back into the truck. My lips curled into a grim line. This was not my doing. It was the consequence of arrogance meeting reality. Around noon the guests began to arrive at Oakwood Manor, umbrellas blooming across the estate like dark flowers. Alex sent more photos, each one sharper than any words could be. Confused faces peering from cars, women in gowns holding up soaked hems, men shaking their heads as they hurried toward the half-dressed hall. The string quartet had not shown. The floral arches were gone. Only scattered chairs remained, glistening under the downpour. I ignored the calls as my phone buzzed across the table like a trapped insect. Daniel's name flashed again and again, followed by Victoria's. I let each one ring into silence. At last I opened a voicemail. Daniel's voice was frantic, stripped of its practiced arrogance. "Dad, send the money now. The estate manager is threatening to shut it all down. Guests are here. Everything is falling apart. Please." His words cracked under the weight of panic. The rain pounded harder, rattling the windows. Another photo appeared from Alex. Victoria in her gown, her makeup smeared, standing near a window of the manor. Her face was twisted in anguish, the glass behind her streaked with water that looked like tears. I stared at the image longer than I expected, a flicker of doubt rising. Was this too cruel? But then I remembered the note she had pushed Daniel to send me, telling me to be grateful while erasing me from his life. The doubt dissolved into quiet resolve. Justice is not always gentle. By mid-afternoon the scene had turned into chaos. Guests milled about under the leaking tents, whispers cutting through the air. Some began leaving, cars turning down the long drive with headlights slicing through the storm. A final audio clip from Alex captured a guest's mutter. "This is a disaster." Poor planning. I played it twice, listening to the judgment fall not on me, but on the ones who had cast me aside. I paced my kitchen, my footsteps echoing against the old floorboards. The storm outside grew wild, trees bending, gutters overflowing. It felt as though the sky itself wanted to wash their false world away. I pictured the grand hall half-dressed, the food spoiled in crates, the whispers growing into rumors that would follow Daniel and Victoria long after the storm cleared. By evening another voicemail came, Daniel's voice raw and pleading. "Please, Dad, help us salvage this." Guests are laughing. Victoria is in tears. "You can fix it, for old times." I closed my eyes and listened, but all I heard was the echo of his voice years ago, accusing me of failing his mother. I opened my eyes and pressed save. I sat in my chair as the rain drummed on, steady as the beating of a drum. My house was quiet, but inside me there was no emptiness. There was only the calm of knowing I had held my ground. I whispered into the storm, "You wanted perfection, Daniel. Now you will learn what happens when respect is cast aside." The thunder rolled in answer, deep and unyielding, as Oakwood Manor drowned in the spectacle of its own collapse. The pounding on my front door came just after nightfall. The storm was still raging, rain pouring in heavy sheets, the sound of water rushing through the gutters like a river. I rose slowly from my chair, the pocket watch heavy in my palm, and made my way to the door. Through the peephole I saw two figures huddled close together, soaked through, their coats plastered to their bodies. I opened the door a crack, and the wind pushed in cold and wet. Daniel stood there, his hair dripping, his eyes wild. Beside him Victoria shivered, her wedding gown poking out beneath her soaked coat, makeup smeared across her cheeks. "Dad, let us in," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "The wedding is ruined. The vendors walked out, the guests scattered. Please, we need to talk." I stepped aside and they rushed in, dripping water onto the rug. The house filled with the scent of wet fabric and desperation. They stood in the hallway like strangers who had lost everything. Daniel ran a hand through his soaked hair, his voice shaking. "We can salvage something, Dad. The honeymoon is booked, the deposits are made. If you wire the money now, we can at least have that. Please." I folded my arms and looked at him steadily. "Salvage? After banning me from your wedding? After sending me a bill like I was nothing but a bank?" Daniel flinched as if the words were blows. "It was a mistake," he stammered. "Victoria thought it would be best. The image, you know. We wanted to keep things polished. It got out of hand." Victoria stepped forward, her eyes swollen. "Stephen, we did not mean to hurt you. It was the stress, the families, the expectations. Please think of us." "Think of Daniel." Her voice cracked as she reached for his arm, clutching it tightly. I felt the old ache in my chest, the tug of wanting to protect my son even when he stood against me. But then I remembered the note, the line telling me to be grateful for being allowed to contribute. I steadied my breath. "Would you still value me without my wallet?" I asked quietly. "Tell me that." Daniel's eyes darted away, his lips trembling. "Of course you are family," he whispered. "But success requires standards. We needed to match what others expected." His voice faltered at the end, the admission hanging heavy in the room. I pulled a folded paper from my pocket, the copy Alex had handed me days earlier. "Daniel," I said slowly, "did you think I would not find this?" I held out the page showing his signature and mine side by side on a vendor contract, except I had never signed it. "You forged my name." His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came. Victoria's grip tightened on his arm, her eyes wide with fear. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Do you know what that island fraud? A crime. And still you stand here asking me for more." Daniel's shoulders sagged. He pressed his hands to his face and muttered, "I regret it. All of it. Please, Dad. I just wanted it to work." The storm outside roared louder, wind rattling the windows, the sound of branches scraping the siding. I moved to the door and pulled it open. Cold rain rushed in, spraying across the floor. "Go learn from this," I said firmly. "Greed has a price. Respect has a cost, too. Until you understand that, there will be nothing from me." Daniel's eyes filled with something between anger and despair. He reached out a hand as if to stop me, but dropped it back to his side. Victoria tugged at him, whispering urgently. They stepped out into the storm, coats pulled tight, her gown trailing in the mud. Their footsteps faded down the porch steps as I closed the door behind them. I stood in the quiet hallway, the sound of rain muffled by the walls, and let out a long breath. The rug was soaked, the air heavy with the scent of rain, but the house felt lighter. I pressed the pocket watch to my chest and whispered into the silence. "This is the consequence, Daniel. You will have to face it." I stood with my hand on the door for a long time after they left, listening to the storm swallow their footsteps. The rain came down in waves, slapping against the siding, dripping heavy from the eaves. My chest rose and fell slowly, the air thick with the smell of wet fabric and mud they had tracked into the hallway. I leaned against the wood, my forehead resting there, feeling the cool vibration of the wind shaking the frame. My son had stood in front of me, desperate and ashamed, and I had sent him back into the storm. I turned and looked at the copy of the forged contract still lying on the table. The ink of my false signature mocked me, Daniel's scrawl beside it like a confession written in plain sight. I picked it up and held it in my hand, my fingers trembling, but not from fear. The anger that had burned so hot days ago had been replaced by something colder. It was not rage anymore, it was certainty. I could not allow myself to be used again. The house was quiet, only the sound of the storm pressing against the windows. I walked into the living room and lowered myself into the armchair by the window. Drops of water streaked the glass, tracing crooked lines down into the dark yard. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, but there was a steadiness in my eyes I had not seen in years. For so long I had let Daniel's words cut me down, made myself smaller so he could stand taller. Tonight I had drawn a line he could not cross. My mind wandered back to the days after Linda died, when Daniel's grief hardened into blame. I had tried to bend under the weight of his anger, hoping it would ease the pain for him. I let him shout, let him accuse, let him distance himself, believing that if I stayed quiet it would keep some thread between us intact. But all it had done was teach him that I would always carry the blame and pay the price. Tonight, I broke that pattern. Tonight, I closed the door. The rain hammered louder, wind pushing through the trees outside. I thought about the look in his eyes when I showed him the forgery. It was not just shame, it was fear. For the first time he saw that his actions had real consequences, that he could not polish them away with charm or hide them under wealth. He had tried to forge me out of his life, and when that failed, he forged my name instead. That was the clearest sign yet of how far he had fallen. I leaned back in the chair, the pocket watch ticking steady in my palm. Its sound was like a reminder from my father, from the line of men before me who carried dignity through harder storms than this. They had taught me that sometimes love meant saying no, that sometimes the strongest hand was the one that refused to be opened. I wondered if Daniel understood that yet. I doubted it, but the seed had been planted. The house smelled faintly of wet earth and the bitter tang of the coffee I had left cooling in the kitchen. I listened to the creaks of the old floorboards, the hum of the fridge, ordinary sounds that grounded me. My heart was heavy but not broken. I felt sorrow, yes, but also relief. For the first time in years I had chosen myself, chosen dignity over fear. I pictured them walking through the storm, her gown ruined, his pride shattered. They would have to face the whispers, the vendors demanding payment, the guests who had seen the collapse firsthand. They would learn that arrogance leaves you alone in the rain. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "Greed has a price, Daniel. You are paying it now." When I finally rose to go upstairs, I glanced back at the door. The wood was damp around the frame where the storm had pushed its way in. I touched it once more, not with hesitation but with finality. The door had closed tonight, not just on their wet figures, but on the years of silence, blame, and exploitation. The chapter was finished. Whatever came next would be written on new pages, not the old ones they tried to keep me bound to. The next few days moved like a strange dream. The storm finally broke and the skies cleared, but the whispers left behind spread faster than the rainwater running down the gutters. I could feel it in the way neighbors lingered longer at their mailboxes, in the way the phone rang more often with voices I had not heard in years. Each call carried another piece of the story, the collapse retold with a mix of pity and quiet satisfaction. Ellis stopped me on the sidewalk, leaning on his cane as he spoke. "Stephen, I heard the estate cut them off completely. No staff, no service, nothing. Guests left in droves." He shook his head and chuckled softly. "That boy of yours strutted too high, and now everyone has seen him fall. His words stung and comforted all at once. Mrs. Jenkins came by with a plate of cookies, her eyes sharp even as she tried to soften her voice. "People are talking," she said. "They say Victoria's family is furious. That mansion was supposed to impress their friends, and instead it turned into a circus." She placed her hand gently on my arm. "You did right by standing firm. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, though part of me still carried the heaviness of watching my son beg at my door. Even at the grocery store I caught fragments of the tale from strangers in the next aisle. A woman whispered to her friend about the wedding at Oakwood Manor that had dissolved in the rain, about how vendors packed up and left because the bills were not paid. They spoke of it like a scandal, shaking their heads as if it were both shocking and inevitable. Alex sent me a message with photos he had taken. Empty tents sagging under rainwater, abandoned tables, guests huddled under umbrellas before leaving. His words were short but carried weight. Full collapse. Vendors blacklisting them. Estate bans them from future bookings. He added a final line that made me pause. "You planted the seed. I just captured the harvest." I sat at my kitchen table with the photos spread out before me, my pocket watch ticking steady beside them. The images should have filled me with triumph, but instead I felt a mix of sorrow and release. I thought of the boy with a missing front tooth holding a baseball in his hand. That boy was gone. The man left in his place had gambled respect for spectacle and lost everything in front of the very people he hoped to impress. Rumors reached me that Victoria's parents were demanding repayment for what they had already contributed. Others said Daniel's company had heard of the fiasco, that whispers of irresponsibility had begun to circle around him there too. I did not know which parts were true, but I did not need to. The truth had already shown itself in the storm. Each evening I lit a small fire in the fireplace and sat quietly, watching the flames eat away at the paper scraps I fed them. One night I pulled out the original bill Daniel had sent me, the pages that had mocked me, the note telling me to be grateful. I fed them into the fire one by one, the crackle loud in the still room. Ash rose and drifted upward like ghosts finally set free. I received fewer calls from Daniel after that night at the door. He had sent one text that simply said, "I regret it." I never responded. It was not anger that kept me silent, it was exhaustion. Some lessons cannot be rushed. Some lessons must be carried in the weight of humiliation until they carve new paths. Neighbors continued to stop by, offering words that ranged from comfort to judgment. I listened politely, but spoke little. What mattered was not their opinions, but the quiet I felt in my own house. It was a quiet that no longer felt empty. It felt earned. As the days passed, I realized I was walking taller, speaking clearer. The burden of being blamed, dismissed, and erased had lifted. The collapse was theirs to carry now, not mine. I whispered to the empty room one night, "This is your storm, Daniel. I will not drown in it." The whispers would continue in town. I knew that. Stories always outlive the truth. But for me, the storm had broken. I sat in the glow of the fire, the pocket watch steady in my palm, and felt dignity settle back into my bones. Whatever came next, it would no longer be built on shame. It would be built on the strength of having finally closed the door. The weeks that followed moved quietly, each day settling into a rhythm I had almost forgotten I could enjoy. The mornings began with coffee at the kitchen table, the light streaming through the curtains in soft gold instead of gray. The storm had passed, outside and inside. I walked the neighborhood again, nodding to faces that once barely glanced at me. Some stopped to talk, offering sympathy. Others simply gave a small smile that said they understood more than words could. I kept to myself mostly, repairing a loose shutter, raking the yard, small tasks that reminded me of steadier times. At night I would sit by the fire and flip through an old photo album, pages filled with images of Linda and Daniel when our world was still whole. I no longer felt the sharp stab in my chest when I looked at them. It was more of a dull ache, softened by the truth that I had done what I could. One evening, as the fire cracked and popped, I pulled the envelope from the drawer where I had hidden it. The bill had already burned, its ashes scattered into nothing. But this was not that envelope. This one had arrived quietly a few days earlier, delivered by the mailman with no return address. My name written in a hand I recognized instantly. Daniel's. I had not opened it. It sat there on the table now, heavy with possibility. I traced the edges with my finger, wondering what words lay inside. An apology, perhaps, or another demand, or something in between. I thought of his face at my door, soaked and desperate, and of the way his voice had cracked when he said he regretted it all. Regret is a seed, I told myself, but only if planted deep enough to grow. I left the envelope unopened. Its presence was enough for now. I wanted time to decide what kind of soil I was willing to offer. Forgiveness is not a gift you hand out lightly, not when wounds are fresh and dignity still tender. The phone rang less often, though once in a while Victoria's number flashed on the screen. I never picked up. I was not ready to hear her voice, not ready to let her shadow back into my home. I imagined her world shrinking now, her parents' disapproval heavy, the friends she had tried so hard to impress slipping away. Perhaps she too would learn something in the silence. One Sunday afternoon I walked past the ball field where Daniel had played as a boy. The grass was damp from a light rain, and a few kids were running bases while their parents clapped from the stands. I stood at the fence for a while, the sound of laughter carrying me back to a time when Daniel's hand fit into mine, and his trust was simple. I wondered if he remembered those days, if they ever returned to him in quiet moments the way they did for me. The sun broke through the clouds, warm on my face, and I felt something loosen in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of space where forgiveness might one day rest. The past cannot be erased, but perhaps it can be reshaped. That night I sat with the unopened envelope again, the pocket watch ticking beside it. I thought of Linda and what she would have said. She had always believed in giving people a chance to change, even when they hurt you. She would have told me to hold firm, but to leave the door cracked just enough for the light to find its way back in. I do not know what I will do with Daniel's letter. Maybe tomorrow I will open it, maybe next month, maybe never. What matters is that for the first time in years, I have the choice. The power is not in his hands, it is in mine. As I leaned back in my chair, the fire fading to embers, I whispered to the quiet room, to dignity reclaimed, and to whatever comes next. The envelope remained on the table, sealed, waiting. Outside the wind shifted gently through the trees, and I felt the weight of possibility in the air. The story was not finished, only paused, and the seeds of reflection waited for their season to grow.